Suicide prevention can be a pretty confronting topic for most of us. But if we're ever going to get close to a future free from suicide, it's a topic we have to get comfortable talking about. There's plenty of great work being done by many great people to try and help reduce the stigma and increase the support around suicide prevention, and you might be surprised to find out just how much is being done near you. I'm Chris Plumridge, and in this interview I catch up with Helen Page, who coordinates the place-based Suicide Prevention Trials project for Gippsland PHN. It's been running since 2016 and is due to conclude in June of 2022. We speak to Helen about some of the projects that have been running as part of the trials, and more broadly about what's being done in Bass Coast, South Gippsland and the Latrobe Valley to tackle suicide. Sitting alongside Helen is Vicki Bradley, Social Planning Officer at South Gippsland Shire Council. South Gippsland Shire is one of the trial sites for the project, and Vicki has worked closely with her community members, who've been working hard to reduce the incidence of suicide in their local areas. We ask Vicki what the results of the trials have been like for South Gippsland and how you might be able to take some of her learnings to do your bit for suicide prevention, no matter where you are or what your role might be. But first, we ask Helen about the thinking behind the project and what the project aims to do.
The idea behind the project is that those particular areas in Gippsland had slightly higher rates of suicide. And the place-based suicide prevention project is about helping to reduce those suicide rates as a long-term goal by looking at how we can do prevention activities in those two communities. There's been a lot of things happening over the last few years, and one of the areas that I think is most important in terms of the community and prevention is our gatekeeper training. So gatekeeper training is about building the skills and capacity of community members to support someone who's having suicidal thoughts. And in terms of prevention, it's the biggest thing that anyone can do if they're looking at working to support someone who may be struggling is to develop those gatekeeper skills. So we've had around 800 people participate in Gippsland so far in either specific training, mental health first aid or online, or being engaged in information sessions and forums and things like that.
In terms of this gatekeeper training, what does it look like and why is it sort of so important?
I think people are very knowledgeable around things like CPR, and that CPR is something that we learn in order to save a life. And it's an emergency response with a sequence of steps that we go through in order to save someone's life. So QPR is a series of steps and skills that people can learn that helps them talk to somebody and identify that when they're struggling and be able to ask that key question, are you having suicidal thoughts? It is essentially the key component of being a gatekeeper is being comfortable enough to be able to ask the question and then having that understanding of how to support someone if they say yes. That's quite different to other training in mental health, first aid, for instance, where there is a little bit of that suicidal thought stuff, but this is very targeted and specific around suicide.
Can you tell me about some of the impacts that you've seen over your time kind of working on the project? What sort of things have you been able to notice?
Quite a number of things, particularly in the last 12 months. I've seen local communities like service providers, including local council, really step up in the area of suicide prevention. They've become more involved in workshops that we've run and in gatekeeper training, and there's been a few really significant projects run within South Gippsland and Bass Coast in particular.
It's probably a very good time to bring in our South Gippsland representative. Vicki, we're sitting in your beautiful Memorial Hall at the moment. Can you tell me a little bit about, firstly, who you are and your involvement in the suicide prevention space from a council perspective?
Yes, so I'm Vicki Bradley. I'm the Social Planning Officer at Council and have been here for over 10 years now. When the Bass Coast prevention trials were expanded to South Gippsland, we were very pleased with that. We equally in South Gippsland had a spike, unfortunately, in deaths by suicide. So it became probably highlighted to us that our involvement was quite important.
And so tell me a little bit about what that prevention project looks like.
Well, we've called it Local Men, Local Communities. It's focused on men aged between 25 and 50, and also helps support the people who support those men. The timing of the project wasn't ideal. It was based on getting out in the community, involving people to become more connected. So, of course, once again, COVID was a limitation on that. But what it did mean that we turned things around slightly. So we also engaged with Wellways, which was great because they'd already put their hand up for the PHN project. And for us, they became our training partner in a way and delivered quite a lot of training online. Question, Persuade, Refer was one that they were involved in. And they developed their programs so well for online delivery that it really allowed us to continue on with our project quite well. So that was a good way to lead in because it meant that we were able to engage with people in our community and ask them as they participate in the training, would you be interested in being involved further with the project? So that allowed us to identify men in our age cohort that we were trying to target to be involved in our project, which was perfect.
Somebody who's not necessarily in the suicide prevention space coming into the suicide prevention space, what's that been like for you as a sort of experience?
It's interesting. Working in the suicide prevention space, certainly for us at South Gippsland, has probably taken a slightly different tack than the PHN because we have worked with our community members by not using the word suicide, by not using the words community connection, by not talking about co-designing workshops. We have tried to learn from our participants what is the language that we can use to encourage people's participation in this important space, because we recognise that whilst we had some enthusiastic people through the training, once you say suicide, it puts a bit of fear into people as to this is going to be very uncomfortable for me. So we've been talking about good mental health and wellbeing and supporting others, even if it is, people who have considered suicide. We're not using that language. We're making it more comfortable for people to talk about it and get together and make opportunities that really are very much on the prevention end, because once people are getting together, chatting, they're supporting each other, and loneliness and those sort of things are less likely, or at least they can feel supported by their friends that they're getting together with. So it's very prevention, so prevention that the group of men that we've been talking about, when they were interviewed by our evaluators about it, said, "Oh, I didn't think this was a suicide prevention project." And we went, tick, that's exactly what we wanted to know. I think we have learnt that by being patient, they have come right full circle around, and each time that they meet, they're more happy to actually talk about people they know or themselves or ideas they have to support others. And now they are saying the words that we've tried to avoid. So they're happy to say that they're talking about suicide. So I think patience is the key, and just keep that conversation going to work out where you go from the not saying the words to actually being comfortable to come out and talk about it.
One thing I have learnt in working in suicide prevention is the importance of social connection as prevention for people becoming suicidal. So I think that's where the South Gippsland Shires project has been so successful, because it has focused on that social connection, and that is a really strong protective factor. And I think particularly for men living in rural and regional areas where they can sometimes experience isolation, that a project like this is definitely ticking boxes for suicide prevention. And then they also then mixed in a bit of that gatekeeper training, so if the topic does come up, there are people there who can support those people who may be experiencing it.
I could tell you a little bit about the guys that have been involved in our project. We call them the chosen, mainly because they chose themselves because they did training with us, or we tap them on the shoulder as a community leader. None of them work in suicide prevention. They act around suicide prevention by doing what they do, but they might be a retired person working a local radio station. They are a farmer, they're a builder. So they're just people from our community, but they've come together with a joint aim now, and they're doing activities to get people together that are really possibly sometimes a little bit quirky. So there was a 24-hour table tennis marathon that ran over Australia Day in Lock. That was an idea from the project, from one of the guys. They mentioned that Beyond Blue was going to be the recipient, had good response to that. Another activity that's coming up is we're rolling out chatty cafes across South Gippsland, and that was another idea of one of our blokes. And so what happens in a chatty cafe is a little yellow sign is put on the table for a certain period of time, maybe 10 to 11 a.m. on a Monday morning in Leongatha. Teardrop flag out the front, chatty cafe, and Jack, our volunteer, will go along within that time, sit down on the comfortable couch in that cafe. People can turn up, enjoy, coffee and a chat with each other. And it's a regular thing. It's just a place, if you're usually by yourself, if you don't go out for coffee with somebody, it's a place you can go. What our project's also done is added to that with a series of vouchers, $10 vouchers that we're distributing through places such as the Community House, the Salvation Army, places where people who might experience loneliness or have a little bit more difficult connecting with other people in the community. And they can take their voucher to the Chatty Cafe on that day and redeem it for $10 worth of refreshments. So getting people along there. Chatty Cafe is not something that we've made up. It's a big thing based in Melbourne. There are a lot of Chatty Cafes. So we're glad to be able to have involvement from that volunteer organisation who's set up the system, and we'll be able to roll that out across 5 or 6 cafes in South Gippsland. So that's another idea of just a guy who's retired. He said, I think this would be a really good way to do things. He'd been involved in the local community houses and so on. And so we said, yes, let's help you do this thing. So, yeah.
Maybe tell me about just how important that involvement of the greater community is in suicide prevention and what we all can do just as people on the street.
Well, I have to plug the resources and the information that we have captured and developed throughout the place-based suicide prevention trials project. There's been a significant amount of work done with the community and local services around developing collaborative resources and things that the community can access. Videos where people with lived experience are speaking about what helped them through hard times. There is an online mental health directory which is co-designed with people with lived experience. It's a really easy online tool to navigate what services are available throughout Gippsland. And then there's also action planning resources and things which are quite detailed and, really help people working in community house through to people working in local government or in working groups focusing on prevention. So there's a lot available that has been put together and captured the learnings from the trials project. And those things are available on the Gippsland PHN website.
The word suicide can often make people shrivel up a little bit. It's been a taboo topic for a very, very long time. What would you say to those people who sort of are listening to this now and kind of still getting a little bit uncomfortable about what we're talking about?
I guess the important thing to remember here is that throughout history there has been a lot of stigma attached to suicide. I mean, look at the language that we've used in the past. It's quite common to say someone committed suicide, which is actually a reference back to when it was an illegal act and also a sin. There's a lot of language that still exists out there, and I think that language kind of perpetuates that discomfort around this topic. But in reality, anyone can experience suicidal thoughts. They're much more common than people realise. And when someone dies by suicide, the impact is enormous and the grief is quite complex. So it's a really important thing to understand better in terms of another aspect of mental health and well-being. And I think people are getting better at talking about mental health in general. So the next step is to also talk about those hard things such as suicide and I think demystify it and destigmatise suicide so we can talk about it more openly is really important.
Talking about mental health and well-being is something that people are becoming more used to hearing, and I'd be hoping that the ability of people to feel comfortable talking about suicide might come into that space as more people do it. Interestingly, with the guys we've been working with, I think they've come around full circle now and participated in gatekeeper training to start. And now they're saying, I would like to volunteer in a chatty cafe, for example, or running talks at our local golf club. I think I need more training now so that I can talk about suicide more comfortably. And so they're back around to that point that they want more training now, because training does help you practice what you want to say. You don't have to worry about that day when somebody might speak to you about suicide. You can practice on your colleagues who are doing the training with you, or even people after that. I know that there's groups of people who say, oh, look, I'd just like to do a bit of practice about what we learnt today. So I think the more that we can offer training such as this, and the more that our local media begins using language that's less stigmatising, the better the whole topic of discussing suicide will come. Because, as Helen said, really common, but we just don't hear about how common that is. And the sooner that you can start speaking to somebody, the better.
If one thing could change in the community for suicide prevention, what would it be?
Having worked in the area for a number of years now, and also I've experienced times when there has been suicides in the community, and I've supported people to develop a response to the suicides. And what we do know is that there can be many good, productive and safe ways to respond to the suicides, and there can also be some not so safe ways. And so it's also something that local media, I would like them to be more aware and more conscientious about, is how they report and cover stories that involve suicide. So what we've learnt through the trials is that those key messages that go out after someone has suicided, they should be around help seeking and providing support, access to support services, rather than focusing on simplifying why someone might have taken their life, or sensationalising the issue and creating community fear. So yeah, that's a big one for me, is around the safe communication of suicide, particularly when there has been a death that has become public.
I think from our point of view, it would be having absolutely everybody out there feeling comfortable that they can respond to somebody if they are having suicidal thoughts, and feel comfortable or confident, I think, to know what they can do and how they can support that person, whether it be referring to a service or just having a chat.
And we know that works. That works, yes. The type of training we've been talking about around gatekeeper and being comfortable to ask someone and able to support them is evidence-based. And we know from people with lived experience that they have told us that the thing that has saved them has often been someone who's asked them directly, and it's actually a relief to be able to say, yes, I am.
For more interviews, check out the Gippsland PHN website. If any of the topics in this interview have affected you in any way, support is available via Lifeline on 13 11 14.